Hey everyone, this is Eric Johnson, and I am delighted to be joining you for the premiere of my new show on the Let's Talk Supply Chain Network. It's Logtech Live. What else would it be? That's my Twitter handle. That's, I think, what everybody knows me best for. So I'm really excited to be joining Sarah's network, and I think this is going to be a fun show going forward, discussing a range of topics that relate to the logistics industry, technology, media, a whole bunch of different things. Anyone who knows me knows I love to talk about a variety of things, and I love how everything is sort of converging, and to really dissect all of that. So let me kind of take you a little bit behind the scenes in terms of how we got started and why we're doing this show. Sarah reached out to me a few months ago and said, "Hey, you should do a show. You're great on panels. You write stuff that people care about. Let's do a show." And I had been wanting to do something, a podcast or some type of show, forever. So I was really grateful for the opportunity to do that. I think doing a show, a live show, kind of the moment, improv style, is sort of suits my approach to covering the logistics industry and technology in it. So I was really grateful for the opportunity, and I hope you are all excited about what we're going to be discussing on a monthly basis. There's probably way more than we can fit in a 45-minute session each month, but we'll try to get through as much interesting stuff as we can. So that's kind of the genesis of why we're doing this. Before I get going on the topics of the day, I wanted to thank our sponsor, Chain.io, for making the show possible alongside Sarah and Let's Talk Supply Chain Network. Really appreciate them supporting this. So this is my first show. Excuse any boo-boos or mistakes that I make. I've never actually done a live show before, so I'm learning on the job here. I'm actually also still in India right now. For those of you who follow me on social, I've been here for about 6 weeks, heading back to the U.S. in a couple weeks, where I'll be doing the show going forward. But it's fun to be here. It's in evening here. It's morning in North America and midday in Europe. So thanks wherever you are for joining us. In terms of format, basically, I'm going to keep this pretty loosely structured because I like to change things up. I don't like too much of a routine, but very kind of in general, I'm going to hit some hot topics of the week or month. I'm going to kind of address issues of the day that are really important in my world and presumably in yours. And then I'm going to, talk a little bit about some of the things that I've been writing about, that my colleagues have been writing about, and that people that in the industry that I think are really important and influential, what they're writing and talking about. So we'll cover that in the first section. I have a wonderful guest today, and each month we'll have a great guest joining us. I'm only going to pick the people who can enlighten us in thought-provoking ways. Today we have Rachel Premack from Business Insider, who's joining us in just a bit. So really delighted to have her and talk about a whole bunch of topics with her. I have way more questions for her than we have time for, but we'll try to get through as many of them as possible. And then we'll wrap up with a section or a segment I'm calling Buzzword of the Month. I'm going to basically take one thing that we keep hearing over and over in the logistics technology space and really dissect it and figure out if it's meaningful or not, or if it's fluff, or if you need to worry about it or not, basically. So watch out for that after our guest, and then we'll wrap up, and you guys can get back to your day jobs. So really encourage you to get comments and feedback in and questions for me and the guest whenever. We'll try to address as many of those as possible. So thanks again for joining. So Sarah, thank you in the background for facilitating all the stuff we're going to be showing people today. Do you want to bring up the Logtech map, actually? Oh, not Rachel yet. Sorry, Rachel. Just hang on a little bit longer. You want to bring up the Logtech map, and we'll dive into what's been a hot topic for me this week. So I don't know if many of you have seen this, but when I say we, myself and 4 other people have been working kind of behind the scenes over the last 3 to 4 months on a map that tries to accurately portray all of the crazy developments in the logistics space. And this is the second version of the map that we've come out with. We're looking at this as kind of an open source, working on this in public. This is not a something that we're keeping under wraps and then gonna kind of foist on the industry. We really wanted to develop this map with the industry and for the industry. So this is what we've come up with so far. There will be improvements. There will be iterations. Hey, Audrey, great, glad you could join us. So this is sort of a living document in some ways, but the general thinking behind it is there's so much going on from a buyer's perspective. It's really difficult to understand what's out there, what category each of these solutions that you may see or that you may be getting inbound email from, where they belong, right? So we tried to give people kind of a starter kit, a roadmap to get started with, okay, my main problem is cargo visibility. All right, well, here's a window that shows me maybe not all of the players, but a lot of the significant players. And now it's my job to do a little bit more research on each of those and see if those companies address any of the pain points that I have. So this is not meant to be a decision-making tool on its own. It's not meant to be the be-all, end-all. We just saw a gap in the market in terms of a map developed by people who are in the industry, who live the industry, who are investing in the industry, who write about the industry. So definitely encourage you to give me feedback on that, either here or on LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn and follow logistics issues, you've probably come across this map over the last few weeks. And we'll be coming out with a new version of this pretty soon, within the next couple weeks. So your feedback is definitely appreciated. So that's kind of been the logistics technology hot topic of the day. Bigger picture in the logistics world, at least the global logistics world, the big issue of the last week. Sarah, do you want to pop that first story up, or should I do that? The big issue of the week has been the FMC and its role in kind of getting into the chaos in the liner shipping industry. So basically, the latest kind of news kind of kicked off with an importer, a fairly big U.S. importer, filing a complaint with the Federal Maritime Commission, which regulates ocean trade into and out of the U.S. And it kicked off with them complaining that there's collusion between a couple lines, that carriers are not adhering to the contracts that they just signed. So really interesting story by my colleague, Mark Saccone here about that complaint. And then that led into, a lot of back and forth, including MSC, one of the carriers that was named in the complaint, coming up with their statement in response. And that, I'm just bringing this story up right now. If I can find it, here we go. Sorry, too many tabs all at once. I know this is like the poison that afflicts us all on our browsers. So another colleague of mine, Peter Tershwell, wrote just yesterday about the impact of what this complaint might mean. Is it going to trigger a bunch of more complaints from shippers who are really obviously kind of tearing their hair out about what's going on right now? Peter does a great job of really highlighting that we have to take a bit of a historical look at this and realize that shippers actually have been in a pretty advantageous position for the last 2 decades, if not more. I thought this line in particular was quite interesting. Right here, I'm just going to highlight this here. Basically, he's contending that over a 20-year period, a lot of the value from those low freight rates was conveyed to shippers. And what we're seeing now is kind of a snapback of that. And the issue right now is, it's multifaceted, right? There's commercial relationships. There's, legal ramifications potentially. There's also the fact that rates have skyrocketed so much and surcharges have been tacked on to such an extent that some companies are facing existential crises. they literally have built their business based on freight rates being a certain amount. And if they sustain at the point that they are right now, some of these businesses are not going to be able to import, and thus are not going to be able to survive. So really interesting stuff. I'm gonna put one more story up here around the FMC's role right now in kind of jumping into this issue. And that's related to surcharges specifically. And this is an area I think is actually quite interesting, because while the freight rates have gotten a lot of attention, I think where the regulatory agency, the FMC, can actually probably step in a little bit more is around what surcharges are being added and detention and demurrage fees, which are fees that are assessed for holding on to a container too long or failing to pick up a container in a container terminal. So you have a lot of kind of dynamics going on at once, but the FMC regulatory body can only really control so much based on the Shipping Act. So I would keep my eye on this one. The surcharges is something that's very interesting to see, especially since the FMC is, or I should say Congress is likely to at least take up a discussion of a revision to the Shipping Act, which has governed ocean trade for now going on 20 years since the last revision. So that's the big topic of the day. I would love to hear kind of people's thoughts on how they're viewing all of this stuff right now. But now I'm going to bring Rachel on. You saw a sneak peek of her, but now we're going to talk for real. Rachel, thank you so much for making time today and joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to hear someone else talk after talking for 10 minutes straight too. For those of everyone who's tuning in who doesn't know you, and I suspect that's a very small number of people by now, do you want to just give a quick background on who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I am a reporter at Business Insider. I joined the company in 2018. Previously, I was actually based in South Korea, reporting on economics and business there. But for the past 3 years, I've been covering the trucking industries in particular, as well as, looking into whatever the hot logistics topic is for the day. For the past year, I've actually joined our investigations team. So I haven't been covering trucking full time as much as I would like to, but I also have a newsletter, a Substack, where I can, I've also been covering those sorts of topics. So yeah, I'm one of the few logistics reporters outside of trade publications like the JOC and other great publications.
Yeah, you've totally made a name for yourself by really taking a really deep look at particularly trucking, right? And so I would encourage people to look for Rachel's stuff, not just on BI in as it relates to trucking. She did an amazing investigation into Bon Appetit last year. And you just did a really interesting one about Apple and their product servicing too. So so this goes way beyond logistics for Rachel. But let's focus today, because obviously this is a logistics audience. So what was it that first got you interested in the trucking industry? What did it strike some nerve in some way, or what? Like, I'm really interested to know how you got started on that.
Yeah, so I'm from the Detroit area, so I'm pretty I'm pretty accustomed to, looking at things from a more like industrial manufacturing point of view. That's just something I'm more, just kind of a viewpoint I'm used to, I guess you could say. But I wrote kind of a one-off piece about the trucking industry when I started at Business Insider. And it was actually about the truck driver shortage. And I put my email on the bottom saying, reach out to me if you're a driver and you have thoughts on this. And as you can imagine, I got
Pandora's box.
Many emails from drivers saying, no, it's not that there's a shortage. You should actually look at this thing that came out this year called the Eld Mandate. And I've never heard of any of this. I'm like completely new to all this. So I write another story on the Eld Mandate, not realizing what a touchy subject any of this really was. Again, put my email at the bottom. And I think probably for the rest of that weekend after I published it, I was getting an email like every minute or every other minute from drivers with like, more information on ELDs, more information on other things I should look into. And yeah, it just kind of became clear to me that this is a pretty big topic, although it's not one that's covered by the mainstream media as much.
Yep.
So yeah, that's kind of
a little bit more now,
yeah,
right? Though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now there's more become, but
yeah. Well, so interesting. So both my own perception, but also in talking with other people who cover the space, we're all sort of universal in our appreciation for your ability to take what we always think of as like a really complicated and sometimes boring or dry subject, really interesting for people whose job this is, but not necessarily so interesting for people who are just passing by a million different topics. What's your approach to taking a story about something like trucking or logistics and making it kind of more approachable to someone who literally has no background in it, and you have to kind of convince them that it's interesting?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, well, actually, I wanted to address one comment really quickly about why the air quotes around truck driver shortage.
Sure. Go ahead. I saw that too. So.
Yeah, there's just been so much debate whether there is a shortage, whether it's kind of created by something else. Some people say it's more of a capacity shortage, and that we have people who want to drive a truck, who are interested in that, but for some reason or another, they just are not actually able to do so. So, for instance, when you look at the owner-operator market, you could be making hundreds of thousands of dollars one year, and then the next year it's a bus cycle, and then you're down to 50,000, 60,000 a year, which is barely enough to really cover how much it costs to run a trucking company. So you have things like that. It's a really volatile space to exist in, to be in. And then on top of that, the pay, if you are a company driver, might not be enough to sustain, having a family, to qualify why you're gone for 3 weeks at a time. There's a higher proportion of truck drivers who don't have health insurance than the average population. It's definitely a job that takes a toll on you, mentally, physically. And at the end of the day, some people might say, okay, given this income, I could make the same amount doing construction or driving Ubers or something along those lines. So,
or maybe McDonald's these days.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I mean, at this point, like, pay's rising everywhere. So, if someone would prefer to stay at home, or if someone can make the same amount of money staying at home and seeing their family every night, then, I guess that's kind of the idea there. But anyway, so how I usually try to figure out angles for articles, I have I mean, it's kind of a handicap in some way. I have kind of the benefit and not great benefit of being in New York City, where there aren't a ton of people involved in logistics. So talking to, friends, colleagues, family members, my boyfriend, whomever, I can share whatever I'm looking into, whatever I'm working on. And usually, depending on how I have to describe something, then that kind of helps me shape where I'm going. I still have to pitch article ideas to editors, so my editor doesn't know a whole lot about logistics, so I have to, I figure if my editor or if my, coworkers are interested in something, then it's like, okay, maybe I'm sure like the larger world might also be interested as well. And yeah, obviously, reading, I couldn't really do this job without reading and industry publications, of course. So I would be pretty much lost without all the coverage that you guys are doing. So I definitely benefit from that quite a bit, just to figure out what direction to go to and what's going on. I'm just one person, and there are whole newsrooms devoted to this industry. So without those publications, I'd be pretty much not really able to figure out what to write about. So
I think what's interesting is, like, and maybe this is kind of my next curious thing I'm curious about is, you've carved out a niche in terms of bridging that gap. Why do you think it's important that the masses kind of have a better appreciation or understanding of the industry, right? Like, because you've taken the time to like explain things for them in a way that they can understand. Why is that important?
Yeah, I mean, so one part I should note is that a fair amount of my readers are actually, in the industry, especially truck
sure.
drivers. So I think if you're like really dialed deep into something, you might not really know what's going on in other kinds of parts of the industry. So yeah, or even I think a fair amount of my readers are like, millennials or young people who are just joining the industry who might not know everything about how it works. So there's a component of that, but I think for why everyone else should learn about logistics is that it's how anything gets anywhere, and I think we kind of noticed in the last year when shortages started, and now this year prices are going up. People want to know why there's a shortage, or why a couch is taking 6 months to get to where it needs to go. And that's why you've got to learn about what's going on in trucking and what's going on in ocean freight and all these sorts of things. So I think people like to know how things work and how things get anywhere, and what's going on behind the scenes or behind the curtain. And looking into trucking and logistics is a good way to do that. And another point is that looking into like trucking specifically, because that's I guess what I know best. Looking into trucking is a great way to see how the rest of the economy is going to be doing in a few months or a few weeks. So if trucking is really lagging, you can pretty much expect that it's a great barometer on what's happening, basically. So I think there are quite a few reasons to look into it.
Yeah, obviously I think this started with Amazon, like where people started to get curious about that, like final 1% of the move of whatever. Like before, when you went to the store, you never even thought twice about how it magically got there. And then the last year, I think you're totally right. It's just like the curtain has moved back all the way, really, to like the factories in Asia, right? In terms of now people are asking me about what's going on in Vietnam, or what are the tariffs? Why are there tariffs on all these things? Those questions never used to get asked. So I am curious about the lasting power of this. Like, are people gonna stay interested in this when prices normalize and they stop seeing ships stuck in canals and that sort of thing? But
I think every year there's like kind of the new hot topic that gives like a good entry point for logistics. So in 2019 it was the trade war, 2020 it was the toilet paper shortage, this year it's the all the craziness in ocean freight,
rates.
That's causing the lumber and everything else to get more expensive. But there's always a new kind of way in. But I agree. I don't know if especially for ocean, I mean, this is quite a year to be an ocean freight person.
Well, this is probably a good segue, right? Like you did a newsletter a couple months back. Was it a couple months back already? Where you sort of like from the studs of the building all the way up, you talked about like what's going on and what's causing all of this. How did you sort of get your arms around the global logistics industry, having spent most of your time in the trucking space?
It's really just all about talking to people, asking questions that make me kind of dumb, asking questions that like, it's like, okay, excuse my ignorance, but I have to like, and ask the really obvious question. Kind of interestingly, going back to a previous question of yours, a lot of it is friends might know me as like someone who can talk about these kinds of topics. So they'll say like, oh, what's going on with this, or what's going on with that, or maybe I want to explain something to them, and then I'm thinking, oh, I actually don't know how to I actually don't know why that's happening. And then I realized, like, okay, if I can't find out why it's happening, and there isn't like a explain it to me like I'm five kind of explanation online, I guess it means I should write it.
You need to be the one who puts that up. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's yeah, like I think there's really great industry like coverage of these things. And there's, you know, and then you kind of see like the occasional CNBC kind of coverage of what's going on, but I think there it's hard to find articles that explain these sort of complicated topics that are just like, okay, we're assuming you know absolutely nothing, but you need to figure out what's going on. So let's just go to like the most foundational thing and just pretend like you are an alien who was just dropped onto this earth. I need to explain to you what a shipping container is. I actually had a story a few years back that had a graphic that had a picture of a truck, of a semi truck, and there was an arrow that said, "This is the trailer, this is the tractor," because it's just like, I'm assuming you know absolutely nothing, which a lot of people don't. And I feel like a little absurd saying like, this is a trailer, this is a tractor, but like, I got to start from like ground zero essentially.
It's interesting, you know. I was asked by, my son is 8, and I was asked by a fellow parent in his virtual class in whenever the Suez thing happened. Initially happened. Hey, I heard you're involved in shipping industry. Can you explain what's going on with this ship? And I was like, yeah, of course I can. And then I realized these kids are going to hit me with a whole bunch of like really basic questions, and I'm not going to be able to answer any of them. So I did more research on that than I did for any article that I would have done on it. And, you know, and so you're right. Like there is a presumption a lot of times that people jump in knowing things that it's a really jargon heavy. I wrote a newsletter a couple weeks ago about how this is not like rocket science, but you need like reps in this industry. And then you can start to figure out how things kind of connect with one another. So yeah, I have a newfound appreciation for how you approach the stories. I always like your writing, but when sometimes I tend to get really deep and I get lost in the forest a little bit on stuff. So what I write about 99 times out of 100 is technology, and this is Logtech Live. So let's talk about the technology issue. And you've broached this in a couple ways in your reporting around, you know, how things like autonomous trucking or software might kind of change the face of the trucking industry. What are your, how do you think about like the people versus automation issue? But, you know, both from that kind of physical job of driving a truck or working in a warehouse to the data entry stuff that might be automated away.
Yeah. Before we get into that, I just want to say thank you for the kind words, and also that, you know, it's work like people like you that, you know, make it possible for anyone to even, you know, begin to understand this industry. So thank you. But
cool. Appreciate it.
I think my viewpoint is that, you know, whatever is going to, at the end of the day, businesses are going to do whatever it takes to reduce costs and increase profit margins. So if that means automating something, then yes, it will be automated. If it doesn't mean automating something, then it won't get automated, or offshoring something, or any of these sorts of things. If it's going to make something easier, or it's going to happen. But I mean, it has been a few years since I've really been deep into or maybe like a year and a half since I've been really deep into some of these questions. But I think in terms of, I think what's going on in freight brokers is probably the most kind of exciting, interesting, near-term case for automation, especially when it comes to like the sort of routine freight that can get automated and brokered much more quickly. You know, kind of more specialty freight is always going to be most likely handled by a person.
Yeah.
But even when you look at something like Uber Freight, they are mostly still brokers doing calls.
Big floor of people pounding the phones, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So like it seems it's kind of mysterious like how this will happen or when it will happen. I know that you know, Convoy is a little bit more automated and a little less focused on the sales side, but I think at the end of the day, if it saves money, it's going to happen, and that's why I'm a little bearish, I guess, on autonomous trucks. At least anytime in the next 10 years or so. It seems like that's still very much in the experimental phase, the kind of working out the kinks phase. I mean, there's still a safety driver in all those cars, so
there's the public like policy issue too of like, are people going to be okay? Yeah. I have to admit, I rarely cover that stuff. That's like a world unto its own that I just don't have the bandwidth to like really understand. So the last thing I'd want to do is try to be some sort of arbiter on it. So, but it's, I think about the automation stuff a lot because the logistics workforce is going to be different, 5 years from now and 10 years from now, and it's going to require different skills. And not everyone can go from a data entry job to a strategic, business development person, or, like those things are not natural progressions for a lot of people. Right. So, and same, it's tough for me to say like, because I don't have any experience in understanding the AV world, like how soon that comes and whether people that would have, like you were talking about earlier, would have gravitated toward other jobs. Maybe those vehicles just end up replacing those people who were having a tough enough time convincing to stay in the industry anyway. So, but it's, I mean, I think every company ought to be thinking about this, whether they have a definitive answer. They ought to have it in their like sort of sphere of topics to be thinking about, because it's there's no question it's happening, and a lot of it is happening kind of very under the surface, right? Like data entry automation, extracting information from emails, all that stuff.
It's not it's not the kind of stuff that like most mainstream tech publications would want to cover. It's kind of funny because every time, this is another thing that always bugs me. This is something actually always bugs me, is that when I'm if I end up in like some sort of like tech VC circle in New York where people aren't dialed into the trucking industry, but they like, read TechCrunch and like other sort of like main.
So they become experts on it from
exactly.
Yeah.
Whenever I mention that I cover the trucking industry, someone's like, "Oh, what about autonomous trucks?" And it's like, no, it's way less cool than you think it is. It's actually all about like you said, autonomous data entry, autonomous like brokering. I get into a conversation like that every few weeks. I'm like, no, it's not. That's not what you should be thinking about. It's so much less like cool than that, but ultimately more impactful, I guess. And going back to me being from Detroit, I'm like very used to like this whole automate versus not automate. And yes, as the commenter just said, the warehouse automation is probably like the biggest thing that's like
that's
outside of the office
mature
setting. Yeah, exactly. Because a warehouse you can control, the freeway you cannot control as easily.
Very true. Yep. It's a closed loop. Well, maybe one last question, and this relates. I mean, we've talked a lot about kind of like your method and how you approach, but I think one thing that's been interesting for me to think about, I don't even want to say how long I've been writing for trade publications in this industry, but it's a long time. And I've been really hyper aware for the last 5 to 6 years, I would say, of all the different forms of content that people can get access to, some of which is like pure marketing on one end of the spectrum, all the way to, deeply reported investigative journalism on the other side. And then in between, everything from very informative and non-promotional blogs to, trade publications to VCs, you just mentioned VCs having their own media arms, right? Like that's kind of insane. What are your thoughts in terms of like how you think about where your coverage fits into that world, and where do you think this is all going?
Yeah, that's a big question, and I think it's something that a lot. I'm sure my boss's boss would love to know the answer as well.
Know the answer? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, just noticing. I kind of track. It seems like every week there's a new media startup, not just in logistics, but just like not even in business journalism, but just like throughout the whole industry. Which always shocks me. I'm like, this is not the industry to invest in if you want a return in your investment. People,
I was like, okay, this is
like sure, like
it's not a pot of gold, you know. So.
Yeah, I mean it's prestigious and you can get your name out there. But anyways, I think the biggest growth that I see, you do see like your occasional blogs and whatnot that are being launched, but practically everything is subscription. And the subscriptions often aren't cheap. I mean, you look at the information, you look at a few other places. There's even a subscription only, the Discourse blog, which was founded by people who used to be at Deadspin. That's a sports blog, and that's subscription only. Or you look at The Athletic, also another sports publication that's subscription only. It seems like there's so much. Honestly, there's so much like junk out there that you really just want to dial down and be like, who are the writers I trust?
Yeah.
Who are the voices I trust? What do I actually care about? I'm just going to pay good money to have those things instead of have this like giant network of like just like trash writing and reporting. It's all about I mean, I pay for a few select publications. And that's kind of how I go about it. I think really what we're going to see is the future of more like highly specific media outlets, and people just really dialing down into one topic and people being willing to pay for that, which I think is great. I think what we lose from that is kind of like this, maybe more 20th century media consumption where we are all kind of watching the same things, reading the city paper, and being able to, converse and have maybe similar viewpoints on things. I think we're kind of losing out on that, but that's my viewpoint, is that things are going to get more specific. Unfortunately, that means, a loss for some sort of shared dialogue and shared commonalities, which is kind of what the big struggle is right now, I'd say.
Twitter is sort of like that, but then there's the Twitter bubble, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure you come across this. Like, I'll have some topic that I spent literally the entire day reading or watching or engaging in, and I, have friends over, and I'm like, "Can you believe what happened?" And they're like, "What the hell are you talking about?"
I don't
even know what the discussion, much less the people you're talking about. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's it's going to be really interesting. I think like one of the things that I've had to learn is just to be as open-minded to new platforms as possible. I mean, we've both started Substacks and a while back now for you, and it's you sort of have to like use all the tools available and figure out which are the ones that like help you engage with the audience in the best way. That's sort of my approach. But well, Rachel, thank you so much. I could go on for a lot longer, but unfortunately we have to wrap up. Thank you so much for taking the time and great perspective, and would love to have you back at some point.
Of course.
And definitely encourage encourage you to find her. We put up her, what's it called? Newsletter address. Also, just go to Business Insider and do a search. You'll find all her stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Rachel. So I'm moving along. I'm going to talk a little bit about the buzzword of the week. But before that, I also have the dad joke of the month. This is something that I'm sort of famous for. At least I think I'm famous for on my Twitter account. My son feeds me a steady stream of really corny jokes, and I appropriate them, call them my own. So I'm gonna pop one in every episode, and I encourage you all to include your favorite dad joke, or as my son's teacher called it, when the mom puts her joke in, a mom bomb. In the comments. Would love to hear yours. I need to expand my arsenal beyond my 8-year-old's jokes. But this month's dad joke of the month is, what do you call a scientist who studies volcanoes? And I need a drum roll. A magmatician. So you all are welcome to keep that one. No royalties necessary unless you want to help pay for my son's college fund. You're welcome to do that. In any case, we're going to move on to our last segment of the show, which is the buzzword of the month. Or each month, I'm going to explain one buzzword as best I can. Again, I have no technical or technological background. I've been learning on the fly through osmosis over the last 10 years, and it's actually a fun way to learn. I'm not kind of constrained by thinking I know more than I do. So this month, I am going to try to explain natural language processing and whether it's important or not. Sarah, can you pop up that entry? Now, this is literally one of probably 8 million web pages that you can find about natural language processing, or NLP, you'll sometimes hear it called. This one in particular was about supply chain. So from Ernst & Young, a couple years ago. I've had it bookmarked for a while just so I can refer back to it and try to understand what it's all about. But NLP is really interesting, I think. I think it's and I'm going to give you, again, the layman's understanding from my perspective of what it is, and then I'll go into why I think it's important or not. NLP is basically a machine that's able to understand language as humans would understand it, and then take it and structure it in some way. So that might mean someone writes me an email. If you set up an NLP program to capture all of the words in the email, might be jargony, might be really colloquial, might be really informal. I might know the person really well. It will attempt to take that language and understand the meaning behind it, contextualize it, and structure it in some way, usually in a business context, to put that information, put it into another system that needs that information. So instead of an email from someone saying, "Hey, hope you're well, hope you're doing okay," it's more likely that the NLP program would be looking at an email for, say, an inbound shipment from China to the US, trying to pick up key information from that email to update a visibility system. Or it might be a quote from a forwarder that's in line in an email. The NLP program might try to take that quote and take the information from that quote and put it into a system, a procurement system or a booking system or a transportation management system, just to flow those pieces of information that are somewhat unstructured in the email and to try to structure them. So as you can probably tell from the way I'm describing this, I actually think that NLP has a huge amount of utility, and that we're sort of only scratching the surface of its usefulness in the market. So I'm rating NLP as something that is definitely worth keeping your eye on, if not playing around with, if not actively investing in right now. I think we're only going to see use cases for it get better, especially as supporting technologies for it, things like OCR and the machine learning kind of systems. This is another buzzword for another time. Both of those are more jargon to add. As those sort of support an NLP program and help companies get information that's been locked away in emails or scanned documents, or PDFs, or other sort of static forms of information into systems that are browser-based and can be accessed by multiple people, and you can actually do something with that information. So NLP gets a thumbs up for being important and worthy of watching for everybody. So we have reached the end of our first show. That went so fast, I can't even believe it. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you to everyone who commented, who chimed in with your thoughts and feedback. Thank you again to Rachel for taking the time to spend a good amount of time with us. I feel like there's a lot more I could have explored with her, but that's always a sign of a good guest. If you're running out of topics, then maybe I shouldn't have had them on. Thank you again to everyone who tuned in. Thanks again to Chain.io for sponsoring this once again, and look forward to seeing you on the first Friday of every month, 10 a.m. Eastern. Thanks again, and thanks, Sarah, for making this all work in the back end. Thanks all. Bye-bye.